In Hollywood, Hedy Lamarr was known for her face. She was called one of the most beautiful women of her time. People saw her on movie screens in glamorous dresses, surrounded by bright lights and famous actors. But behind that image was another Hedy Lamarr. A woman who loved machines. A woman who studied weapons. A woman who spent nights thinking about signals, radio waves, and how technology could be used in war. And one of her ideas would later become part of the story of modern wireless communication. Her invention did not directly create Wi-Fi, but the frequency-hopping technology she helped develop became an important part of the history of wireless systems. The story begins far from Hollywood. Hedy Lamarr was born Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler in Vienna in 1914. Her father was a successful bank director. Her mother was a pianist. As a child, Hedy was interested in how things worked. Her father would take her on walks and explain machines to her. He showed her how streetcars moved. He explained engines. He talked about technology and the machines that surrounded them. Hedy listened. She was also fascinated by the world inside machines. She wanted to understand what was hidden behind the surface. But there was another side to her. She loved acting. As a teenager, she began appearing in films. Her beauty quickly attracted attention. And soon, her life moved into the world of European cinema. In the early 1930s, she married Fritz Mandl, a wealthy Austrian arms manufacturer. The marriage brought her into a world very different from the cinema. Mandl's business involved weapons and military technology. Important people visited their home. Military officers came to meetings. Engineers discussed weapons. People talked about torpedoes, aircraft, explosives, and radio systems. Hedy listened. She remembered what she heard. She learned about military technology simply by being in the room. But her marriage was unhappy. Mandl was controlling, and Hedy eventually escaped. She left Europe and traveled to London. There, her life changed again. She met Louis B. Mayer of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Mayer offered her a contract. She became Hedy Lamarr. Hollywood had found a new star. In America, she appeared in major films. Her screen image was carefully created. She was elegant, mysterious, glamorous. Audiences saw a movie star. Few people saw the engineer inside her. At home, however, Hedy continued thinking about technology. She kept a work table where she experimented with inventions. She studied machines. She sketched ideas. She collected equipment. Her friends sometimes saw her working on technical projects between film productions. Then World War II began. Europe was at war, and Hedy was deeply affected by what was happening. She had escaped Nazi-controlled Europe. She had heard military conversations during her marriage. Now she wanted to help the Allied cause. She believed her knowledge could be useful. At first, she considered using her understanding of weapons technology to help. But one problem particularly interested her: the radio-controlled torpedo. A torpedo could be guided toward a target using radio signals. But radio control had a weakness. If the enemy could detect the signal, they might interfere with it. They could jam the frequency. If that happened, the torpedo could lose control. Hedy thought about the problem. What if the signal did not stay on one frequency? What if the transmitter and receiver changed frequencies together? The enemy would have a much harder time blocking the signal. That was the basic idea behind frequency hopping. Instead of sending a signal on one fixed radio frequency, the system would rapidly move between different frequencies according to a shared pattern. The transmitter would change. The receiver would change at the same time. To someone trying to jam the signal, the communication would be much harder to follow. Hedy worked on the idea with George Antheil. Antheil was a composer and musician. At first, the partnership might seem strange. A movie actress, a composer, and a military communication problem. But Antheil understood something important. Music depended on timing. He had experience with synchronized player piano mechanisms. Hedy and Antheil realized that a similar concept could be used for radio communication. They imagined a system in which the transmitter and receiver could switch frequencies together. A coded sequence would tell both sides where to move next. The enemy might block one frequency, but the signal would already have moved to another, then another, and another. The idea was ambitious. In 1941, Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil filed a patent for their secret communication system. The patent was granted in 1942. Their invention was intended to help guide radio-controlled torpedoes. But the military did not immediately put the system into practical use. The technology was difficult to build with the electronics available at the time. The idea went largely unnoticed by the public. And Hedy returned to Hollywood. She continued making films. She continued appearing in magazines. Audiences continued to see her as an actress. Her technical work became a footnote. For decades, very few people outside technical circles knew about the patent. That is one of the strange parts of her story. She had helped develop an idea related to secure radio communication. Yet most people remembered her for movies. The technology did not disappear, however. The basic concept of frequency hopping continued to develop. As electronics improved, engineers found practical ways to use similar techniques. Frequency hopping systems eventually appeared in military communication. Later, related ideas became useful in other wireless technologies. This is where the modern Hedy Lamarr story needs some care. You may hear that Hedy Lamarr invented Wi-Fi. That is not quite correct. She did not invent Wi-Fi itself. Wi-Fi was developed decades later through the work of many engineers, researchers, and organizations. But her frequency hopping patent was an important early contribution to the broader history of spread spectrum and wireless communication. Her idea belonged to a family of technologies that helped make wireless communication more resistant to interference. And those ideas later influenced technologies used in modern communication systems. That connection is what makes her story remarkable. The actress people saw on screen had also been thinking about radio engineering. But during her lifetime, she did not receive the recognition many people believe she deserved. Hollywood gave her fame. Technology did not give her the same attention. Hedy eventually became frustrated with the way people saw her. She wanted people to understand that she was more than a beautiful face. She once made clear that appearances were not the whole story. There was an intelligent and inventive person behind the public image. Her life after Hollywood was difficult in other ways. She faced personal problems. Her marriages ended. She became increasingly isolated. Her relationship with the public changed. And as she grew older, the world seemed to move on. Meanwhile, technology was moving quickly. Computers became smaller. Radio systems became more advanced. New wireless communication methods appeared. Ideas that had once seemed impractical became possible. The technical world slowly began to recognize the value of frequency hopping concepts. And eventually, people started looking back at Hedy Lamarr's patent. Her name began appearing in discussions about wireless technology. She was no longer simply an actress. She was also being remembered as an inventor. In 1997, Hedy and George Antheil received the Electronic Frontier Foundation Pioneer Award. It was a significant moment. After decades of being known mainly for her films, Hedy was finally being recognized for her technical work. She reportedly responded with humor, saying it was about time. By then, she was living far from the Hollywood image that had made her famous. She died in Florida in 2000. She was 85. Her death brought renewed attention to her life. People began asking a simple question. How could someone who had been famous for movies also have been working on military communication technology? The answer is that people are rarely only one thing. Hedy Lamarr was an actress. She was also curious. She was also technically minded. She was also someone who had lived through war and understood that technology could change the outcome of a conflict. Her story is not about a Hollywood star suddenly becoming a scientist. She had been interested in technology long before people began celebrating her inventions. The technical side of her personality simply remained hidden behind her public image. And perhaps that is why her story took so long to be understood. People often decide what someone is based on appearance. If a person is beautiful, we may assume beauty is their main quality. If someone is famous for music, we may forget their other skills. If someone is known for science, we may forget that they have a life outside the laboratory. Hedy Lamarr challenged that simple way of thinking. She showed that a person could live in several worlds at once. She could stand in front of a movie camera during the day and think about radio signals at night. She could understand the language of Hollywood and the language of engineering. She could be both an actress and an inventor. And the world did not always know what to do with that combination. Her frequency hopping idea also reminds us how long it can take for an invention to find its place. An inventor may create something years before the technology exists to use it properly. That happened in many areas of science. An idea can appear before the world is ready. Hedy's system depended on electronics and synchronization techniques that were difficult to implement during the early 1940s. Decades later, electronics had changed. Wireless systems had changed. Computers had changed. And suddenly, ideas involving rapidly changing frequencies became much more practical. The path from her 1942 patent to modern wireless communication was not a straight line. Many engineers contributed along the way. Many technologies developed independently. But Hedy Lamarr's work became part of that larger history. That is the honest version of the story. She did not invent Wi-Fi. She did not build the modern internet. She did not create every wireless technology we use today. But she helped develop an important idea in secure radio communication. And she did it at a time when very few people expected a Hollywood actress to be working on such problems. There is another lesson in her story. Recognition does not always arrive when the work is done. Sometimes it takes decades. Sometimes people remember the wrong part of your life. And sometimes an idea becomes important long after its inventor has stopped talking about it. For Hedy Lamarr, the world first remembered the actress. Later, it began to remember the inventor. Today, her story is often told to students learning about technology. Her name appears in discussions of wireless communication, and her image has become a symbol of the idea that intelligence can hide behind appearances. But perhaps the most interesting part of her story is not the patent. It is the moment when she looked at a military problem and refused to accept the obvious solution. The signal could be jammed. So she asked, what if the signal moved? What if the enemy could not follow it? That simple question led to an invention that would survive long after the war. The world around her changed. Radio became more powerful. Computers became smaller. Communication became faster. Wireless networks spread across homes, offices, cars, phones, and cities. And Hedy Lamarr's name eventually returned to the conversation. Not just as a movie star, but as a woman who had once sat down with a composer, studied a problem, and imagined a different way for signals to travel. Her life reminds us that people are more complicated than the labels placed on them. A person can be famous and overlooked at the same time. A person can be an artist and an engineer. A person can be remembered for one talent while another talent quietly changes history. Hedy Lamarr spent much of her life trying to be seen as more than a beautiful actress. Today, she is remembered for both sides of her life. The movie star and the inventor. One stood under Hollywood lights. The other sat beside a table covered with sketches and technical ideas. Both were Hedy Lamarr, and the second one was waiting for the world to notice.